Well, welcome everyone to the first virtual lunch of the Lamb Stand. On this inauguration day, this is our inaugural virtual lunch. And I think it's fitting on this day that we're doing a Moroccan tagine because in December 1777, Morocco was the first country to recognize the independence of the United States. So kudos to Morocco. So welcome everyone who is either on or will be watching this as we record it. I will be joined by two guests. The first is my niece, Jenne Bergstrom, and in a few minutes by Colt Taylor. So I'll introduce them and then talk with Jenne a bit. And when Colt comes, we'll switch to him. So my niece Jenne is a double-barreled food blogger. She's got two blogs, 36 Eggs, which reprises recipes from literature with a whole bunch of research. The most famous of which is this Little Women that she wrote with Miko Osada, and looks at all the food in Little Women and organizes it by the women in Little Women, and figures out recipes and how to cook them. And she has another blog which is called Convoy Conquest, which sets out to eat at every restaurant in the kind of main Asian commercial thoroughfare in San Diego. I think she's done that, and now she's going for a second round. So she lives very much in the present of San Diego and in the past of food and literature. So that's a pretty cool combination. So I want to kind of talk about that that time travel through cooking. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about, making the tagine. We did the video, put a recipe up, and encourage people, especially the guests today, to make it and go wherever they wanted with it. And I'm sure each of you did. So I'm going to start off by saying how I varied it from my own recipe. So first of all, I used leg of lamb rather than lamb shoulder. I had some lamb stock in the fridge, so I just used boneless leg of lamb that I was able to get from Beaverbrook Farm fresh yesterday. And I seasoned it before I browned it. I didn't do that in the cooking video or in the recipe. I think it helps to do that. What else did I used chickpeas rather than cannellini beans. I actually think the best thing to do would be fresh fava beans in season, which is not, but that would be cool to do. And when I made the couscous, instead of using water and olive oil and salt with the couscous, I used lamb stock, and I used the oil from the artichokes. There's Colt.
Oh, hello.
So we were just getting started, and I introduced Jenne, my niece, who's a food blogger and cookbook author. And so I'll introduce you, Colt, and then we can talk about the tagine, and then I want to talk to you especially about farm to table cooking in season.
Wonderful. I'm sorry I'm late, everybody. Hello.
Yeah, no worries. Colt,
got a lot going on in my life, Kip. Got a lot going on in my life.
Colt is the recent father of twins.
Yes.
Wow.
That's a
good excuse for pretty much anything.
But just to kind of introduce Colt, he is the chef owner of the Essex and the Essex Food Hall. And it's not only the best farm to table restaurant in Connecticut. It's just the best restaurant in Connecticut. I met Colt. I met Colt when he was doing a one-time only ultimate fish cooking class, and it was.
But I will be starting classes through the restaurant.
Oh, really?
In the next couple months.
Right. Anyway, that was the best cooking class I ever took, and the restaurant had this the original concept was a formal side and an informal side. The informal side is now a food hall, but it was a Mexican restaurant called Los Charros, La Cantina Los Charros.
Yep.
And pre-COVID, it was my Cheers. That's where I would go and hang out at the bar and have Mexican food. And I grew up in California, so I know of Mexican food, and it's Mexican food in Connecticut, not a high bar, but is really good Mexican food. So anyway, I was just talking about where I took the tagine a little bit differently than how I cooked it. And Jenny, what did you do?
Well, I made it pretty close to the recipe. I did use fava beans because I love fava beans. I used frozen ones. Yeah, just my mom came over and we just had a good time cooking it together. So we ate it last night just with, instead of couscous, I used like bulgur with vermicelli, kind of made a pilaf of that. Just when I was shopping in the Middle Eastern market for ingredients for this, I found that in one of the bins and I thought that looks interesting. So it was really tasty. And but this morning I decided to do kind of a sort of historical leftovers version of it, because I was looking back through this cookbook where, here, let me just change my view so I can see myself again. Hi. So this cookbook is called The Young Housekeeper's Friend. And when we did the Little Women cookbook, we used a lot of recipes from this book in it because it is actually mentioned by name in the text of Little Women, the novel, which is pretty cool. So I was going back through and they have a whole section on, ways to use leftovers, which are super interesting. We might talk about that later. But one of the common things to have is what they would call hash, which like nowadays we think of hash as, it's kind of like potatoes and meat and it's kind of fried up together for breakfast, right? But back then it would be more like you would take the leftovers from a roast and chop them up and serve them in with the gravy, not too dissimilar to the lamb curry we were talking about earlier. And then you would serve it over toast, just kind of in a bowl, and it's kind of like your, Sunday night leftovers kind of meal. So that's what I did. I don't know if I can hold it up to see, but I have my bread that I made and I've got the leftover tagine, so I'm going to eat those together. So yeah, that was my plan.
So Colt, where did you go with it? Looks like you.
I'm doing it right now in front of you, Kip. I don't cook for no reason. So we're actually kind of flying by the seat of our pants to experience this right now. But I can give you the first and foremost, and I hope this isn't sacrilege, because my beautiful wife does not eat lamb. Is like that. So what I did was, I'm actually taking the dish and making it with beautiful Wagyu brisket. And we're gonna stay true to form in the flavor profiles, but we're gonna add a little competitive edge. And this is something that we sell out of the market, which is beautiful tandoori seasoning. And we're gonna give it a little bit of an extra edge along with the coriander, the olives. And the big thing I say is always just take your saffron and infuse it with your stock. Don't add excess water if you don't have to. So I just put that in there, but I toast the saffron threads first. I always keep coriander whole. I do this because it's a very soft spice. So anytime you're doing coriander, if you can see, we just keep the whole actual chunks of it in there. And what it allows you to do is toast it a little bit longer and get a little more depth of flavor into it. And then what we're doing for like a fresh backdrop is, I decided to go with edamame. So this is going to add a nice fresh bite to it, almost like along the lines of the chickpea, but you're going to get a little bit more of a soy bite to it. And in the end, what we're going to be left with is the flavor profiles of what you're looking for. And we are deviating a bit on the citrus level because I am one of those crazy people who understands the purpose of bitterness. So whereas I don't just have preserved lemons sitting around at my home.
I do.
That's nice. We have 1.5-year preserved lemons at the restaurant, but they're like gold.
I can beat that. I have 10-year preserved lemons.
That's impressive. That's very impressive. I feel like the American palate doesn't really understand and appreciate bitter, but bitter is one of your predominant flavor profiles. It's a taste bud. And when you go to France, like we've talked about this, Kip, creme brulee is actually burnt on top. It's burnt cream. It's charred. That is to create a difference that cuts through the sweetness of the creme, bitter and sweet. In America, you have this sweet on sweet, carb on carb kind of celebration of one singular note. So when we go to citrus and the tangine, I'm actually going to go to the grapefruit. And I do the grapefruit because while it provides that citrus backdrop, it also has a lot more bitterness that's going to peek out throughout everything we're doing. And we're going to lastly finish it with a touch of brown sugar. And in doing so, the intent is not to make it sweet. The intent is to give it some sugar in the backdrop that balances the bitterness, that spiciness, and it's going to allow us to elevate all the flavors. So we're going to do zest, sweated down with the onions and garlic, nice and julienne. And then what we're going to do is we're going to finish it with the juice of the grapefruit at the end. So you get that pop of acid from the fresh juice, but you get that bitter, citrusy flavor throughout in the whole sweating process.
Hey,
Yes.
Could you back up just a bit?
Yeah.
You toasted the saffron?
So the saffron is actually steeping in my fresh sauce that I just poured on the computer.
Sorry about that. But Colt, I thought you said before you put the stock on it, you toasted the
Yeah,
saffron.
so I just take the saffron threads in a dry pan and I just toss them around just for a minute. Any kind of heat is going to bring the aroma out of spices of any kind.
Right.
Yes, and one thing you can go a different step, which is often used in a lot of Iranian dishes, where you actually put the saffron directly into fat and you infuse it into the fat, because then a couple threads of saffron carry a lot further. As we all know, when you're dealing with spicy food or any peppers or any spices of any kind, when you sweat them in fat and bring them to aroma, you take them at about 10% aggressiveness to about 80 to 100% aggressiveness. So that ability to start things off in fat and bring them to what we call aroma, which is where you can waft the scent into your nose and really smell the perfuming of it. What you're doing really is activating the spice. And that's such an important step that people don't do. The same thing holds true for citrus zest. That's why we sweat it with the onions and the garlic. It's why you sweat onions and garlic, to bring that flavor out. If you just do it raw, you're left with kind of a small percentage of the aggressiveness that could be there had you not done it the right way. So, Catherine, bear with me one moment. Where's my coconut?
Right. So, Jenny, what do you think of that?
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm curious how the grapefruit's gonna be in there. That sounds interesting. I like it.
Yeah, and that's our fat.
Okay.
So it doesn't taste like coconut. It tastes very neutral, but it's got a great smoke point, and it's also extremely on the healthy end of fat as far as things go. So the first thing we're doing is we're toasting all of it to get a nice aroma in all of our spice blends. And we're quickly going to add the onions first, followed by the olives, then the garlic, in that order. Okay.
Hey, Colt, just another rewind. You said you used the whole coriander rather than ground.
Say that again?
You said, I think earlier, you used whole coriander rather than ground.
Yeah, I try not to grind it because coriander is such a soft spice that it actually will shatter and break up in the pan fairly easily. And we all know, as black pepper goes, once you grind it, you have about a 10-minute half-life for any spice that you grind up. So we really try not to grind them unless it's a la minute over something. And anything that's not extremely hard, like a peppercorn, let me be more specific, like a black or white peppercorn, we try to keep it whole and intact, because then it's going to eventually break while cooking, and that's going to release the flavor in its full capacity. So when you talk about pink peppercorns and green peppercorns, you'll notice we always keep them whole. With coriander, they're really not hard. Like with one finger, I'm crushing this thing. So when you keep that in mind, you're going to get the maximum level of everything by keeping them whole. So I'm starting, I don't even know if you can see this, but probably not. I can smell it and it's delicious. So that's a good start. So we get all the spices in the pan and we're just bringing it to aroma. And while that's going nice and low and slow, we can dump all of our sauteed onions right on top. Now you'll notice one big thing that I did not do. I didn't sear my meat, right? Once you become, you know, somebody who works in professional kitchens and you really understand the searing of meat and what it does, it creates a nice Maillard reaction that promotes great flavor. And it also locks in the juices, so to speak. But once you've operated in good ovens and good restaurants, what you realize is you can oven sear. And what that means is turning your oven much higher. Typically at home, people are used to cooking at like 350, 375. I'm at 500 in my oven. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make this very potent and strong base with the onions and the garlic and just sweat it a little bit translucent. And then I'm going to toss all of the meat in our tandoori spice as well, and a little bit of the fat. And I'm gonna partition it up on top of everything and put it in the oven. So the meat is gonna sit on top and that nice, strong oven will get a sear, and then we flip it halfway through. And then once we have the sear we want, we simply add a cartouche, which is a parchment paper lid that allows some evaporation but traps steam, so you get the maximum combination cooking. This is what I would call maximizing your time and efficiency in a kitchen. The act of searing is a great thing to do, but when you're actually running, you know, around like a crazy person trying to operate a restaurant, that extra step is inefficient. And it's not adding anything to it if you know the proper way to oven sear. So, right now,
someone who had a question.
yeah, go for it.
Let's see. I don't know, maybe they went away.
Right.
Hold on, I'm just seeing, Misha, can you unmute yourself? You can ask your question.
I'm all set. I'm listening.
Okay, great, thanks.
So I recommend a microplane for everybody who doesn't have one. It's like one of the most important tools in a kitchen because we use so much citrus zest. I think so many people are confused about citrus that this is a great point to get the point across. Remember the simple fact that the flavor of citrus is not in the flesh. It is in the zest because that is where the fat resides. And as we all talk about, once we're experienced in this, fat is flavor, right? Fat is flavor. So the flavor of an orange, the flavor of a lemon, the flavor of a lime, it is all in the zest. What is in the flesh, especially when it comes to cooking, is the acid. And that's such an important part as well. But to only use the flesh, you're not maximizing your fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So
you know, when
here we have the toasted spices, we have the sweated onions going on. We just zested all the grapefruit. And I do put a little bit of the pith in there. I don't go too shallow on top, again, because I think bitterness is such an important trait. And then as we go, we just season with salt as we go. It's very simple. If you season as you go, you're left with a great tasting product.
Mm-hmm.
We add our olives and our garlic at the same time. Garlic really doesn't need to cook much.
Right.
Olives are already cooked, which means we're just trying to marry together the flavors of these. Okay. Meanwhile, while that's sweating, we can take all of our meat. And again, this is tandoori seasoning, but what tandoori seasoning really is a combination of Indian spices, essentially It's like a ras al nat, which is a house spice blend. And if you really get into it, it's cumin, coriander, black and green cardamom. It's a lot of different flavors going on, finished with paprika and, you
Yeah,
know,
you'd find all that in Morocco, in the Rasso.
yeah. And I think, you know, one thing you learn about really delving into a lot of Middle Eastern cuisine is that it is so house driven. And what we mean by house driven is Ras Al Hunat is the major spice blend of that region, but Ras Al Hunat means house blend, which means everybody's version is slightly different.
Exactly.
The whole point of it is to bring together these cooling and spicy flavors together. So we just coat our meat nicely, nothing too intense, because we want to let the meat speak and we want to let the olives and the citrus take the predominant stance on everything. But we get it nice and coated. And if you decide that you really want to do this on a level where you can go ahead, you want to season your meat with salt lightly, as well as your spice blend the night before, and let it set up in the fridge. To give you an idea, when we do charcuterie and when we do proper forced meats and sausages and everything else, you want to marinate your meat before you grind it for 1 to 2 days. There's a reason, because this allows all of that flavor to penetrate deep inside the meat. The same thing holds true for a roast. The same thing holds true for anything you're really getting into. So at this point,
Hey, Cole, let me cut in here for a second. On the issue of salt in the original tagine recipe, the reason why there wasn't added salt is that the preserved lemons are salty. I mean, so I think when you're thinking about how to salt the dish, you got to think about all the things you're adding to it and which of those contain salt. So you're anticipating that.
Absolutely.
And the reason why you use the rind of a preserved lemon and not the pulp, one, that, as you say, that's where the flavor is, but the pulp is just so full of salt that if you use pulp with the rind, it would just be way too salty. So,
Absolutely.
right.
So at this point, I think you're hitting on a good point, and that is, in a lot of these old school, very traditional dishes, what we see is a lot of preserved and fermented foods. And I think it's one of the biggest kind of trends going on in the food industry now. It's almost a resurgence of times past. So, you know, people need to understand using these ingredients so they're not intimidated by them anymore. Not only do they taste great, but they add a completely different flavor and dimension to our food. Texturally, they do. Flavor-wise, they do. But they also add a huge probiotic punch across the board. So as Kip knows, we have a very big kimchi program in our restaurant, and we make garums. We make a lot of different fermented things that take anywhere from 3 months to a year and a half. We make homemade fish sauces as clear-cut as tuna marrow fish sauce to halibut cheek. The fermentation of everything is such an important aspect of what we're going to do. In this dish, I don't have it because I didn't have it on hand. It shouldn't stop you from experiencing the flavor in the dish. So now I'm set up to go to oven roast here. Okay, this is my marinated meat over all the sweated components. What I have not added yet is the edamame, because I want that to be fresh towards the end. I have not added my cilantro or parsley yet, because I want to get the sear in the oven at a high temperature before I add the herbs. And I have not deglazed yet with my stock and saffron mixture. So at this point, I'm putting the meat in the oven and we're going to town. Top shelf, and we're gonna let it brown.
Can you just talk with folks a bit about, depending on how you want something to cook, what shelf you put it on in the oven?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it depends on the kind of oven you have. For everybody's knowledge, what a chef likes at home. I do not have a gas stove. I have an induction stove. I do this for two reasons. I don't like a noisy hood. My life is surrounded by auditory stress at the restaurant, from blenders to hoods to everything else. And with an induction, you don't need that. Number one. Number two, it's a more precision cooking item. So you can go within 0.1 degrees centigrade accuracy. With that said, I also have a convection oven. This makes a really big difference. If there was one thing that I would upgrade a kitchen to that doesn't have it, it's a convection oven with the ability to get full surround cooking going on. As far as your shelf, whenever you're doing roasts, when you're at the high end of things, when you want to get a nice sear, go up top to the elements. But when you're doing a low and slow cook, you want to be down at the bottom because you want movement around the top of everything. That's a very important aspect. If you have a convection oven, there's less specifics on where you have to put it because the oven itself is moving the air. But in a normal home oven, you want to make sure that you constantly have airflow over the top, and you don't want to overcrowd your oven. It's just like overcrowding a pan. If you overcrowd the oven, the heat is going to drop down too much. It's not going to be able to maintain this high level, and you're going to be cooking in too cold of an oven, simply put.
Now, are you at a break point now where the food is cooking and we can?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm just cutting parsley stems because that's where the flavor is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. Jenny,
Yes.
I'm intrigued by the fact that you, on one hand, live in the past. You're a research librarian. You're a librarian who has these enormous research skills. You love to read, and you read about recipes that you like, and then you try to reprise them and do it in as an authentic a way as possible, true to the method of cooking at the time. And then on the other hand, you're in this riotous commercial strip of one different flavor of Asian restaurant after another, living in that world today. And they're really different worlds, and I'm just wondering what that's like, because it seems to me that the big difference, one of the big differences between how we cook and eat today versus how the folks in your books cooked and eat is we're so wasteful. You know, everything comes in plastic. We throw away a lot of the stuff as we do prep. Then we don't eat everything, and instead of figuring out something else to do it with it, we throw it away. And this Moroccan dish, I mean, Moroccans don't eat like that. They go shopping every day. They just buy what they need. They use it all. There's no packaging of any kind. It's kind of like how we go to a farmer's market in the summer. And so they have a very simple way of eating and living that's directly connected to the land. And they don't waste anything, I think, more out of necessity than out of an ethic. But I'm just wondering, you know, you sort of dip into a zero waste world in a sense when you go back, and then you come to this present that is just intensely wasteful. And I'm just wondering what that crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think to your first point about, you know, the two worlds being very different, I think Miko and I really think of eating, which I think really more than cooking, like our excitement is about eating. Like I really enjoy cooking. Miko doesn't so much. She does it because she likes to eat. But in both cases, we're really trying to have an adventure. We're trying to find something new. Like we really want to find, you know, the best thing possible to eat. We want to explore all the corners and make sure we're not missing anything. That was the whole genesis of Convoy Conquest, really, was that we started out by, you know, we would eat on this street all the time. And one year for Miko's birthday, we thought, okay, we're going to have a convoy crawl, and we're going to walk between our, say, 4 or 5 favorite restaurants because, you know, exercise. And as we were walking, we saw all of the other restaurants that we were missing. And we thought, you know, gosh, what if we are, you know, going to these same 4 restaurants all the time when there's something else that could be so much better, right? So that was the thing that kind of was the seed of all of it. Of course, you know, many people know about Jonathan Gold in Los Angeles, sadly gone before his time. but he originally did a similar project on Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles, which is an incredibly interesting and varied street. And so I want to give credit where credit is due. We did not come up with the idea of eating at every restaurant on the street, but so yeah, so and you also mentioned before, sort of time travel in cooking. That's sort of another adventure we wanted to have, and we wanted to be able to have that same experience that people in our favorite books did. We wanted to try to not a lot of the times when we publish our recipes on our blog, we don't only try to recreate the recipe, but we also try to recreate the experience around it as much as possible. So we maybe try to do other activities that were in that scene in the book, or wear clothes, or things like that. So but going back to the zero waste issue, I was thinking about that a lot as you were saying that. When we were writing the cookbook, and especially my role mostly was the recipe testing, whereas Miko's role is more the research side of things. And so as I was making all of these recipes, I really did get into that mindset of I'm making this thing, what is left over, what can I do with the leftovers, what can I tell people to do with them. There's a lamb curry recipe in the book, in fact, which I kind of was in the same situation of like, well, I could only find lamb shoulder chops in the store. So I cut it up. I have all these bones left over. Well, why don't I use them to make a stock for the sauce of the curry? It's just kind of a natural progression of thought if you're cooking that way, right? And there's another, a lot of recipes in the book that seem very complicated and time consuming, but that's because we don't have these, the leftovers that would be expected to have. Or there's a fancy French dinner in one of them, and we have to make a sauce that is a component for another sauce that's a component for another sauce, and so on. And so if you have to start from scratch and make all of those things separately, it's a huge undertaking. It can take days, and you're just like, okay, well, I have to learn what a velouté sauce is. I'm not a classically trained cook at all, but once you understand what the system was, where you have people that have made all these sauces already, you have them, it's super efficient because you're building upon all of these flavors that you've already built in these other components of a dish, right? And so the same thing works with home cooking, where you have some kind of thing like, I don't know, you have a pot pie that has a potato crust, and okay, if you have to go and make mashed potatoes to make the potato crust, that's not helping you, right? But you probably already had some mashed potatoes left over from yesterday's meal, or just a variety of things like that, where you have all of these ingredients because that's the culture that you're living in, that's the style of food that you're already making. So you can put them all together and make a thing. And just like Colt was saying, you're being efficient in the kitchen, no matter what kind of culture or time period you're living in, or what other things you're trying to do. Everyone is trying to get done with this chore as fast as possible. Like, there's a lot of us that, especially Kip and I, we like to cook elaborate things just kind of for the fun of it, to, as in a hobby or entertainment. But, the people that were cooking things in this book, like this book was specifically written for women who had, who were just married, and it was kind of a time period where, cultural things were shifting. You didn't have servants to do everything for you. So there are all these young women that are coming into a marriage where they are suddenly responsible for an entire household. And this woman, Mrs. Cornelius, like this book, I really highly recommend anyone take a look at it. It is surprising how well these recipes are written and how well they work for that time period. As you may know, historical recipes are often super vague. They imagine that you have a lot of previous knowledge. So this one really, for the standards of the time, like for nowadays, this still is very vague, but for the standards of the time, they were very specific and like really gave you a lot of useful knowledge. So yeah, it's just, this is an incredible amount of work that people had to do every day just to get food on the table. I mean, it tells you a whole schedule of like how to do things during the week. You have a whole day for laundry. You have another day that it's your baking day, all of this kind of thing. So yeah, that's what I mean.
We're gonna-
People are still people. People have the same problems no matter what time period it is, right? Also, other point that I always try to make is that people in the Victorian era liked good food and their food was tasty. They didn't just have like all plain boiled things that were super boring and not good, you know.
Just the English.
Hey, are you, Colt, are you doing something interesting that we need to see?
I just wanted to show, like, the first side is already seared. I don't know if you can see that well.
Yeah.
And the simplicity of that is all of your fond, as we call it, which is the browning that normally sticks to the bottom of the pan, and then you must deglaze with all this extra step. Well, now all of that, all the juices are just directly into your braise. So it's a very efficient way to do it. So now we just flip it to the other side and we oven sear the opposite side and we're good to go. That's all I was showing quickly.
Okay.
But I would love to say something to piggyback on what you were saying, because I really respect what you're saying. And at the end of the day, I believe it's like one of the most lost things on the home cook. And I think it comes back to how we were raised. In this country, people are not raised to have to, you know, be creative. They're not raised with anything other than simplicity, especially my parents' generation, you know, the whole Ritz cracker and cheese whiz, high-end cooking craze of the 50s and 60s, the processed food thing. Farmers markets went to the wayside, and yes, they're coming back, but very few people were raised in a household where you had to just deal with what you had. And I think so many home cooks are just simply intimidated. But the easiest way to put it is there's no reason to be intimidated. At the end of the day, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking a recipe and substituting till you're blue in the face with like ingredients.
Yeah.
I think one of the major ways to talk about things that we have laying around is what comes down to, in my opinion, the most important thing that separates a home kitchen from a restaurant kitchen, at least a good restaurant kitchen. We make stock every day. We make stock nonstop. White beef stock, roasted beef stock, chicken stock, both white and roasted. This takes time. Our beef stock, our white stocks take 12 to 18 hours. Really, we go for 2 days, 3 days straight, so we can do a proper remoulage or second washing, second round on the bones to maximize. But every sauce in our restaurant is predicated on the same thing, and that's called a double stock. This is something that I learned working in France, and it's a way to have no waste. So if you're making chicken stock, the only stock you really need to make is white beef stock. It provides the maximum gelatin content of any stock out there. So if you make a white beef stock, or you go to a nice place like the Essex market and buy some that we sell by the quart of fresh made white beef stock, you can just put it in a pot and add scraps till you're blue in the face. You add your chicken bones to it. Chicken bones have the maximum flavor of any stock, but they have crap gelatin. So when you make a chicken stock using beef stock, you end up with the perfect building blocks for any finishing sauce. If that then turns into this tagine, like we did here, you take your lamb trimmings from cleaning up the meat, you put it into the double stock, you take any of the scraps, you add that as well, like it's a vegetable stock. And what you have is a really beautiful, like ground level base for your dish. You don't have to have chicken stock around and beef stock. You just have to have a stock that you're always adding to. And that is one of the most important aspects of doing this properly. I also think that, like we just said, I sat here with a bunch of parsley. I washed it off fully. I chopped the whole bunch. I didn't pick the leaves off and discard the stems where all the flavor is. We use everything because you have to respect everything. Everything took time. Everything costs money. Everything has flavor. You need to find the best way to use it. At the end of the day, I think so many home cooks have just been raised in this world where, you know, they're uber picky about what goes into their dish.
Mhm.
cut the crust off their bread, things like that. And we need to get back to that world where that,
Right. Well, and people don't understand like in a recipe, like what is important. They don't
yes,
know which things you can substitute or why, or what difference it would make, because a lot of people, like you say, they're not brought up cooking. They don't know, they have no basis for anything. So
right.
there's
That's
sort of
not-
like, here's a recipe. This is like rules I absolutely have to follow. Otherwise, it's going to all fall apart. It's just like someone who's never used a computer before, they're afraid to like try any buttons because they're like, well, it's going to explode. Right. So I think in a lot of areas, we really need to give people permission to play around and to fail and be like, oh, well, this time.
And it's about the ratio. Like when you look at a recipe, it's not about the ingredients so much as it is the ratio. The ratio of liquid to solid, the ratio of meat to spice. The ratio is what we talk about in professional cooking so much. And once you embrace the ratio, you embrace substitution. For instance, every kilo of meat requires 12 grams of salt and 5 grams of spice. That is the basic ratio for sausage, for braises, for anything, which means I need roughly 12 grams of salt for every 2.2 pounds of meat I'm cooking, and I need roughly 5 grams of spice. There's no rules there. You can use any salt you want, you can use any spice mixture, you can use any meat. It's a ratio, and that ratio is what allows you to get to the finish line in a positive way, but have fun doing.
Yeah, maybe we can ask President Biden to issue a kitchen scale to
That was
every
fun to
person in
say,
America.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
That'd be a good place to start.
if you look at this cookbook by Doug McMaster, Silo,
Cool.
recipes are exactly those kind of ratios.
Yeah,
He doesn't tell you 1 cup of this or whatever. He tells you that, for example, that ratio you just expressed about salt.
yes.
And he has a couple different ratios depending on where he wants to go with the salt.
Right.
But I thought it was such an awakening to me to think about that. And I was working last night on the recipe for the next cooking video we're doing, which is interesting because it explicitly uses the leftovers, and it reprises something that Jenny has every Christmas and Easter, and I had growing up, which is we'd have a roast leg of lamb for dinner. Then the next day we'd do a lamb curry with toppings.
Mhm.
And my mother just basically took the lamb gravy and the leftover lamb and added some generic curry powder and then served it over, Uncle Ben's converted rice. And she
Which,
had,
I mean, it's good.
yeah,
Let's not say it's not good, but I suppose you could be a little fancier with it.
it was still good, but the rice in particular,
No, the rice, yeah.
I spent a lot of time in the Puerto Rican community, know a fair amount about Puerto Rican cooking, and discovered their rice, which I think is the best in the world. And so I made Puerto Rican rice and I showed people how to do it. And then somebody asked me, well, so what makes it Puerto Rican rice? And I started thinking about it. It's the ratios. Instead of 2 to 1,
1.5 to 1.
3 to 2. And instead of, it has more salt. It has like 4 times the oil. It's just, and those, and it, instead of just throwing everything into cold water, bringing it to a boil and cooking it, it has this very kind of elaborate process for how you cook the rice. And, but it got me thinking about ratios again. And I think you're right. That's what you have to understand. You have to understand.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to put it, going back to the rice, to me would be when you compare 3 of the most commonly known greatest rice dishes of all time: risotto, paella, and sushi. All 3 of them use their own kind of rice based on where that cuisine started. But any one of those 3 rices, for instance, paella uses bamba rice. In Japan, they use a nishiki style short grain rice, and they use carnaroli, arborio in Italy for risotto. At the end of the day, they're all short grain rice. They all have a very high starch content. But if you follow the technique, for each of those things, you can use any of those rice for all three things, no problem, and get the same result.
Yeah, where Puerto Rican rice is a medium grain rice, so you
Right.
have to differently.
Exactly. So, I mean, when we talk about substitution, oh my God, I can't find Bamba rice. You know, that's very hard to find. You read a paella recipe and you're like, what the hell is Bamba rice? Well, that's because it's very expensive to import. And when you do find it, it's overpriced. So why not use the readily available carnaroli? Just like if you're doing Puerto Rican rice and you want a medium grain rice, that's all you need to know. You don't need to know the type of rice specific to it to make it approachable for somebody in Connecticut to cook authentic Puerto Rican food.
Right.
And that comes down to science. You held up your book. My book over there is called On Food and Cooking by Harold McGee. It's our Bible. I was, as Kip knows, I went to college. I was a pre-med major in molecular genetics. I was gonna go to med school before I decided to follow my passion. And I can tell you that every day, science and cooking intersect so frequently and so importantly that it is, and I don't know, eye-opening to see how much of what we're doing is like being in a chemistry lab, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, another cookbook I like, I had it on the counter here, I don't know where, it was the Food Lab, and the guy who wrote it was the head of science for Cook's Magazine, and he's a self-confessed food geek. You know, I really relate to that. I don't want to just know how, I want to know why. And
Yeah.
he gets into the science of how to boil an egg, you know, or how to make a hamburger or whatever, some really prosaic stuff, but there is science behind it that matters. And
Absolutely.
to debunk the conventional wisdom about how to do something and say, this is how people say you should do it. I've tried it 10 different ways, and no, that's not the right way to do it.
Right?
Right.
I mean, there's many ways to do many things. There are definitely definitively right and wrong ways to do stuff. But when it comes to the right way, there are many ways to do everything. And it depends on which cuisine you're following. Kip knows my restaurant at the Essex. What we do is we go to different regions and we do a very in-depth study on the technique and the authentic ingredients of the area. So last January, we did Brazil, where the whole menu was Brazilian, from pão de queijo that we imported illegally to kupi, which is wild cassava from the Amazon. And we fermented it.
Something here. I love feijoada, which is sort of the national dish of Brazil. And Colt's feijoada was far and away the best feijoada.
So similar to cassoulet, it's ridiculous.
Right.
So similar to American hunter stew from the Montana region, it's ridiculous. It's like when you really, I didn't know Brazilian cooking when we started this. I just wanted to study it. We went to Brazil, then we went to Hokkaido, Japan. We went to Native American cuisine, where we did nothing from domesticated animals. So everything was seeds and nut butters that we made. We didn't use salt. We used this thing called colt's foot you can find foraging around the coastline, which is a little marine herb that's super salty. And what the Native Americans did was they burned it and then they ground up the ash and they sprinkled that over it. These are little bits and pieces that we learn by exploring the authenticity of a cuisine. And then what we do is we take some of those techniques and we carry it over and it stays with us forever, but we understand the why, and then we adapt it to an approachable modern American take on it. And I think it's so important because people are always intimidated by cooking. And I consider myself very, very well read and somebody who studies a lot about the basis of food. And I have accepted for my entire cooking career that I don't know anything when it comes down to it. Every day I pick up something new. It's to challenge myself to learn. Right now, what I'm doing, tandoori, I've never done this before. I'm having fun with it. I'm doing something that I know my wife will enjoy for dinner.
Hey, Colt,
Yeah.
What are you doing right now? What was that you were just doing?
I removed the meat from the pan. I am adding my chickpeas. I am adding my saffron stock, which has a beautiful color to it. Because at the end of the day, a braise is combination cooking by definition. Scientifically speaking, it is wet and dry cooking. There's only two types of cooking. Grilling, for instance, is dry cooking. Steaming is wet cooking. Boiling is wet cooking. Braising is what is called combination cooking, just like stewing. What that means is the part of the meat that is submerged in the liquid is wet cooking. The part of the meat that is above the water line is dry cooking. That combination cooking is what breaks down all of the interconnective tissue and creates a very, very supple, soft protein. So what we're doing is we're adding the chickpeas to the water line to create almost a stand to put the meat on.
You use both chickpeas and I never know how to pronounce it, the edamame.
Edamame.
Are you
So we're using white chickpeas and then edamame.
edamame, right?
And what it's going to do is give us a textural differential. I'm not big on soy products, but fresh edamame, when you can get it organically, I like a lot because it is not that really altered texture. And while it is this bright green, it will kind of die out in color through the cooking process. But more importantly, edamame has a really unique texture when you braise it. It keeps this bite to it, if you will. It doesn't turn to mush, but it's super soft. It's a little bit different than chickpea, but similar.
Where did you get yours?
From my restaurant. You can get it actually at Stop and Shop. They have it in the aisle, ready to go, next to the bean sprouts in the produce section. And I also added my herbs. So now everything is in here, and we're going to combination cook till this meat is cooked through and beautiful.
Right. So one thing I wanted to say about the lampstand, in Colt's confession that he doesn't know anything, which is totally up, by the way. But it's true for us, and we are out on an adventure to discover every way there is to cook every cut of lamb from every ethnic perspective. So we don't expect to finish that journey in a year or 10 years probably, but we're planning to discover all that with you, with our audience, with our customers, with the employees of Werewolf New London, because we're not exactly going to be a restaurant. We're going to be an employee canteen to which folks from outside the company can join us and customers can join us. And it will basically just be a lunch only restaurant, but and it won't only have lamb. I think the employees would get a little crazy after a while, but it'll have a different lamb dish every day.
Our
So,
teach lesson. This is important for all of you people out there. This is a piece of tin foil. Fold it into quarters. Make a little cone. Hold the cone in the center of the pan to get to the edge and rip. And then you unfold. And this is how we cook the proper French way. Wax paper works really well for this. Unfortunately, I just looked and I didn't have any. So now I'm forced to use foil, but it's still better than nothing. And
but
this
you could measure out your parchment paper or your wax paper the same way.
same exact way. And what you do is you make a lid that's circular that fits right over the top, but gives you room for evaporation. What this does is it slows down the steam as it's cooking and holds it right around the meat, which keeps it in an ultimate cooking environment for braising.
Yeah, and that's what the lid on a tagine does as well. So
Exactly.
he's made his own tagine. One of the things I wanted to say in the cooking video that I forgot, because I was cooking on a glass top electric stove, which is what I have in my kitchen. Not that I would particularly recommend that. It's just what's here. I think it came with the house actually. But anyway, the glass top diffuses the heat from the electric element. So if you're cooking with a tagine and you're going directly on, where you would have to go directly on the element, whether it's an electric element or a gas burner, you want a diffuser, which is basically just a piece of metal that goes on top of the element, and then you put the tagine on that, so you don't overheat the tagine and crack it. For my stove, I don't have to worry about that, but for your stove, you might. So just a little, by the way. So, Jenny, more thoughts on time travel and cooking and all that? I mean, we kind of cut you off before because it looked like Colt was doing something interesting.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Yeah, no, that was my main thing. Just, I think trying to directly cook the recipes from the past rather than assuming what they were like. It's a really interesting adventure to have. Like I said, coming into this, I kind of expected that the food would not be very exciting. And many of the recipes are simple, but they are not boring. They're not flavorless. They really, showcase the items that they had to cook with. And also, in the mid 1800s, there was, a lot of trade with other parts of the world. Like people were not just eating like potatoes with butter on them. Like they had curry powder, they had lots of different spices, they had a huge array of strange types of ketchup. There's mushroom ketchup and walnut ketchup and pickled limes. If you have read Little Women, pickled limes are a very important part of the story, and that's the same as those preserved lemons. So
what's a pickled lime?
Basically, it's the same as a preserved lemon, but lime, they often actually put them in giant barrels in India, filled up the barrel with seawater, and then sent it across the ocean. And like by the time it got here, it was preserved, basically. Then there were other recipes that you could, just make here with citrus that you already had, but kind of a similar thing. You pack lots of salt around it, you add spices, you put it in your cellar for 6 months or whatever. So, there were a lot of these condiments that kind of get forgotten. And we just remember the main dishes that sound really boring, but people really ate interesting food and they liked food that tasted good. And, yes, here, let me get mine because it really is 10 years old.
We're going to show off each other's preserved lemons. So, the first time I had a tagine, it was a chicken tagine with preserved lemon and olives and apricots. And my wife and I were just so taken by the flavors that we had to get preserved lemons. And we went all over Paris looking for preserved lemons to all these different ethnic markets. And of course, we finally found some right near the Tunisian restaurant in Place Bastille that we started, which kind of makes sense. That's where the North African market was. Anyway, it was a good thing to be looking for something because we found all kinds of stuff that we weren't looking for that was really interesting. But the crazy thing about it, it's so simple to make preserved lemons. You don't need to buy them. Look, lemons and salt.
Yes.
That's all it is.
It's like about 10 years ago when I first moved to this house, I made several jars of these, and these ones are still going strong, and they still taste great.
Yeah,
Meyer lemons is my favorite for preserved lemons, but it's getting to be time to make some new ones.
Yeah, and you want to use organic lemons because you're eating the rind. You don't want pesticides, but
yeah, I mean, in California, if you just kind of stand around on a street corner, someone will probably give you some lemons that they grew in their backyard. So
yeah, always wash your lemons, whether they're organic or not, because there's all kinds of bacteria on the outside that can be propagated in any fermentation.
Yeah, this will be done. I'm counting the days in I think in March. I think I did it a month ago. So you got to let it go 2 months basically before it gets that kind of perfumey quality that I mean, if you don't have that aroma, then why bother with the preserved lemon?
It's fun if you make limoncello from preserved lemons.
Oh.
Tell me how to do that.
So you do your preserved lemons and then you pull one out and you rinse it off thoroughly, and then you coat it in just sugar and you pour grain alcohol over it.
Hmm.
Pretty nice.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay,
that-
I need to try that.
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that, right? And I also really love it if you get them Satsuma mandarins preserved. Those are really nice because they have that really bitter contrast to them that comes out. But people shouldn't be afraid to try this with any citrus of any kind, from pomelos on down the line. Any citrus preserves well. Lemons are the best because of their juice content and the rough thickness of their rind. But when we talk about the fermented and preserved foods, I mean, they are all so simple. It's just patience, and that's something people struggle with.
Yeah, and some of them, like the kimchi, last quite a long time.
Yeah,
So I,
absolutely. And that's another learning moment we had. Like, people were at my restaurant were like, "Oh, well, we're out of cabbage." I'm like, "So what? You can make kimchi out of anything. You can make it out of peppers. You can make it out of scallions. You can make it out of daikon radish. I mean, we sold those at the Chester Farmers Market. We had all sorts. We had carrot kimchi. We had all different watermelon and lime radish kimchi from Upper Pond Farm. Pretty much what it is you learn the technique for kimchi and then you apply it to whatever extra produce you have. And it's like the perfect way to go. And all of that starts with something so simple. It sounds intimidating. Lactobacillic fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
All you do is take your produce, if you have any extras and you don't know what to do with it, and you submerge it under salty like the ocean water. So add salt to water till it tastes very salty like the ocean. Put your vegetables, your produce in that. Let it sit out on the counter for 3-4 days submerged until you see little bubbles forming. You have just started lactobacillic fermentation. It's the basis of sauerkraut. It's the basis of kimchi. It's the basis of so much in historical world cooking. And if you do that, you preserve something that otherwise might go bad. You have a very fun, texturally and flavorful, different approach to cooking that can be used in a simple stir fry or it can be turned into kimchi. And this is a way that you prevent waste. And the reason that we see so much of this in ancient cooking is because, like we were talking about before, they didn't have the ability, the means to waste anything. If they had stuff left over and it was going to go bad, they had to do something with it. I mean, that was the foundation of everything. Just like bread was used to thicken soups because bread went bad. That's what they
Oh,
did.
there's a whole section in this book on what to do with bread scraps.
Oh,
One of
wonderful.
which is super interesting is that you keep a jug of sour milk in your kitchen, and as you have little bits of breadcrumbs or things, you just put it in the jug of sour milk, and then you end up making like sort of like pancakes out of it later.
Oh, that sounds good. And that scares people who don't understand.
Right.
It. But once you experience it, you understand that just because it's not something I see in the supermarket food aisle, I'll throw it out to you. It's not at Ralph's. I don't understand it.
Mhm.
Right. And that's a problem. People need to step outside of it. Oh, it's not the bright green color I'm used to. It must be bad. I'm just going to throw it away. That's wrong. You know, broccolini is a great example. Broccoli rabe, it yellows very quickly. And once those florets yellow, I know so many people who just throw it away. I'm like, no, have you tasted it? Once it's yellowed, it's germinating. It's delicious. It's a different approach to it.
Totally.
are you going to do a fermentation class when you do your cooking classes at the
Yeah.
restaurant?
So what I'm working on putting together now, because I need to, you know, step out of my restaurant a little bit more, is I'm starting to put together a plan to launch Family Meal, which is a Zoom cooking class on Wednesdays where I will be home right here cooking. And there will be a weekly recipe and you can either shop for it yourself and just sign up for the class, or you can pick up a kit with all the ingredients measured out at the Essex market.
That sounds so
once,
fun.
yeah, once we do that, we'll definitely do a kimchi class in there. You know, we'll do all kinds of stuff. But I want it to be like family home style cooking, just like what I consider I did to your tagine recipe. I made it a home style home cooking meal, you know?
Hey, Colt, how much longer are you cooking this now?
An hour and a half. You don't have to wait for it to be done. I'll send you a picture.
Yeah, we're not going to be around for the finish, but
No, not at all, but I will be.
it was really cool to see.
It'll go oven to mouth. It's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
The big thing with braising, just remember this, everybody, once it finishes, keep it out on the counter and let it cool down to room temperature at its own natural pace. Otherwise, you end up with dry meat. It must reabsorb all the liquid that it's cooking in. And if you don't do that, there's like a protein matrix in meat that's like a mesh. And when you cook it, it gets parallel and lets all the juices out. And when it cools, it goes back to this mesh and it reabsorbs like a sponge. So at that point, when I pull this out, that's when I will squeeze the grapefruit juice on top so that it not only absorbs all of the braisage liquid, but also the citrus to give it an acidulated backdrop.
Cool.
Cool.
So, we've gone an hour, so probably need to wrap this up. And I just wanted to say to anyone who's joined us or who will be watching this, the tape of this, thanks for watching. We're going to be doing another cooking demo, another recipe or set of recipes. In about a week, we'll come out with another video, and then we'll do another virtual lunch a week after that. So the one that's coming up, so this tagine that I made with lamb from Beaverbrook Farm in Old Lyme, the recipe that we're going to be doing next will be using lamb from Colonica's farm in Watertown, Connecticut. And I tell some stories about that farm. It was really cool visiting it. So what we're doing is, I mentioned it before briefly, is a roast leg of lamb. I'm doing it Greek style with lemon and oregano and thyme and rosemary and garlic over potatoes. And then the leftover lamb and gravy we use as the basis for lamb curry. When my mother did this growing up, because this was Christmas and Easter, Jenny still does it with her family. And my sister does it with hers. And they keep adding toppings. They're up to like 12 or 15 toppings now. But my mother just took the gravy and the lamb and added some curry powder, and that was that. And
you always stick with the madras?
Well, I don't know. She had some, yeah, probably, but anyway, I decided somewhat accidentally, because when you cook the lamb on potatoes, you don't end up with a whole lot of fond to make a good gravy. And my gravy was really pretty bland. She didn't cook it on top of potatoes. She had a rack and a roasting pan and, created a nice set of drippings and fond and all that. And then they do potatoes separately. I think they do twice baked potatoes separately. So that's a nice meal. But I just wanted to do, roast lamb Greek style. I'm not sure why, but I did. So that's what I did.
I got something for you to come try.
What's that? Oh, okay. Wow.
The Greek spice blend.
Oh, cool. I used all fresh herbs with it. When I squeezed the lemons in, I threw the lemons in the pan, and the lemons roasted with the potatoes and the lamb, and that was good. Anyway, it's a really fun dish. I actually thought it was just my family that did it. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought my mother invented it. And it turns out it comes from a Malaysian dish. She incorrectly thought it came from Indonesia, and she called it rice stoffel. It was absolutely not rice stoffel. I've had rice stoffel. But there is a Malaysian lamb curry with toppings that was popular in the 1930s. Somehow it came over to America. We Americanized it. Like, one of the toppings is bacon. Malaysia is a Muslim country. They don't eat bacon on curry, and neither does Indonesia. That's the biggest Muslim country in the world. So hard-boiled egg and bacon as toppings is to me, it's just like quintessentially suburban LA. I expect for the Jetsons to show up for breakfast, you know, but so and then I did the Puerto Rican rice instead of what she would do is the Uncle Ben's converted rice or something. Anyway, so it starts in Greece, goes to India by way of suburban LA, and ends up on top of Puerto Rico. So it's kind of this fusion of different ethnicities. And I want to say with the lamb stand, we're going to explore every one of the ethnic communities in Connecticut, just like you do, Colt, at the restaurant. And feel free to kind of mix and match, you know, do some fusions of them. We are a melting pot, the quintessential melting pot of the country. There's almost, well, let me put it this way. There's 100 different ethnic nationalities in Connecticut that are big enough to have their own historical society. 100. There's only 200 nationalities in the world. We have half of them represented here. So we want to kind of, while we're celebrating the farm and the farmer and the sheep and the lamb, we also want to celebrate those ethnic communities. So anyway, join us on this great adventure. We'll see you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.